because I'd like to first of all welcome you to the Woodkey venue on behalf of the City Planner, Dick Gleeson, who will be speaking later on, and the City Council. They've made this venue available to us. It's called the Woodkey venue. I gave you the links to it. It's on the site of the old city of Dublin, and behind me is the Viking city wall, or a part of the city wall. Okay, right, yeah. So it just shows you how much the city has expanded. And where you are, where most of you were staying last night in Trinity College, that was the old swamplands that was well beyond the city boundary, and where the monastery was set up in the 11th, 12th century, that eventually then became a university in 1592. Okay, so you just give an idea of how things have expanded. There's also the castle that we didn't pass, but the castle's not that far away, just in that direction. So welcome. It's good to see so many people. There are about 50 of us today. And I need to spend the first part of the morning going through the administrative part of the management committee. I'll explain that in a moment. But I couldn't resist putting things in context because since we met in April, we had our kick-off meeting in April. So in April there would have been not quite 30, about 30 of us who actually met in Brussels for a kick-off meeting. And between there and now, so in the sense of 2.5 months, big data has been on the screens pretty consistently. I mean, this is a UK newspaper called The Guardian, and it's highlighting obviously quite a famous person who leaked documents from the US, from the NSAI. So I'm getting used to the place now. This is the audio. And I wanted to put that on really because there's the one issue that came to the fore, whether it's government strategic information, or this came up in the Irish Times earlier this month, was the issue of privacy. Privacy of data, either like national security data, or in this case you can see the founder of Facebook. And apart from privacy, I also found this interesting article in the FT that was comparing Apple with Microsoft and how Microsoft's Windows are broken and the comment they should learn from Apple. And in that case, it wasn't about privacy of data, it was making systems usable, rather than just having machine-like systems. And when we began to think of this cost action almost over a year ago now, one of the key features of it in my mind was how can you actually think about big data and cities in terms of the needs of the citizen or the needs of the user and giving it a user-focused. And I remember early on having conversations with my colleague Yves at the back, Yves de Ver from Vito, that's one particular niche feature of what we're doing is thinking of a city or thinking about big data, but particularly with users' needs very much into the forefront of our mind. Because most city projects these days are about resources, water, waste, and electricity. Okay. I also thought I'd make a few opening comments because in about 5 minutes' time, we'll need to go into something called the management committee. Okay? So cost has the potential to be a very bureaucratic arrangement, whether it's paying for expenses, I can explain that a bit later, or actually how you run it. Okay? So we've got these 2 days, and I've put together, with the help of my colleagues, a pretty busy program for you. But at the same time, I also want to create space in there so you feel you are creating this cost action. It isn't just one or two people's ideas. Okay? So in 10 minutes' time, we'll start the management committee. And that will last up until, I think it's 11:15. I'm being very precise in my times. I'm not normally that precise, as my colleagues know. Timing Yeah? But there's coffee, at 11:15, so that's encouragement for us to finish the management committee side. But before we do the management committee, I just want to run through a few slides that I showed in April as a reminder for those of us who were there, the 25 people, I think, who were here, and then the rest of you who were not there. So you can see the idea, what was on the script. Now, this is one slide that hopefully encapsulates what this action is about. And I've got hardware and software. The hardware I'm characterizing by the built environment, the roads, the bridges, the buildings, all that stuff. On the other side, I've got something called the software. And the software can be, for example, the governance of the city, but also down here, I've put in the software for running the digital information, the digital data. So you could characterize what the space we're in as this hardware and software, and in the middle, I've put in something called users' needs and say users' preferences. And above it, I've got something called a design process. Now, it can seem like a no-brainer to actually say that. But I'm amazed the 5 years that I've been at Trinity, and I was tasked to set up a research center, which we called Trinity House, that the main thing we've been doing is just listening to people and finding out what they need and what their preferences are, and how might you design a building, or how might you design a road system, or how might you put together an educational campus, or how might you design a home for dementia sufferers. That's all we've been doing, but it's like rocket science compared to most things, because most buildings and most cities are not designed for people, whether you're a planner, an architect, an engineer. You just do your stuff. You learn it in university, you discuss it with your peer group, but you rarely ever bother finding out, well, does it really fit someone's needs? This room, for example, encapsulates that. I was asked to carry out a project on this room. It's a flagship room for the city council. It's got the wonderful feature of the Viking building. But there was a question, for example, in winter, why were nearly everybody in here feeling uncomfortable? This is supposed to be a funky architectural space. So we spent the best part of 12 months just finding out why was that. And actually what happens is that if we were sat here in midwinter, I could be burning the gas bill here phenomenally. And still you would not feel comfortable. That's because the engineers who designed it and the architects put all the heating systems in the ceiling here above us. So that means I could be burning the gas at a phenomenal rate, and if you sat up in that ceiling, you'd be incredibly warm. Then if I need to somehow get the heating down to here, I have to turn up the volume, the flow rate, and the hot air will come down here, but you'll still feel very uncomfortable because you'd have this big downdraft. So that is an example of how things get designed without really thinking too much about who's using it. And this is just one of many, many examples. So this is an opportunity for us, if we took that approach of thinking the hardware and the software of a city, and then thinking, well, what do people actually need, and thinking about it with a design process, that could actually give us a real standing start. Also, what I found fascinating, as soon as this idea comes up, this is probably one of the most interesting groups of collection of people and professions and expertise that I've been in. Excuse me, I've done the worst thing possible. Not switching off my phone. The reason I say that is, I and Dick Leeson, who will be here to give this talk later in the morning, we're members of something called the Academy of Urbanism. What normally happens in the Academy of Urbanism, which is a very good place, is really, it's a collection of architects and some planners. Brian Evans at the back, his colleague, is on the board of that. So in the Irish group, when we meet together, we're really architects and planners. And the last meeting I went to, they said, well, what's your comment? And I said, I've never been in such a narrow group of professions. Because I've mentioned this cost action, where there are social scientists, political scientists, media, communications, graphics, Then you get the engineers, the planners. It's a really broad collection of people. And I'm anticipating that the reason is that it tries to look in a city in a different context. Okay? So this was a slide that I put up. And to justify it in terms of the cost office, FP7, the European Commission, I related that back to this document called Cities of Tomorrow, Challenges, Visions, Ways Forward. And I can post this presentation on our website, which just identifies the threats: unemployment, aging societies, social exclusion, urban sprawl, all of those things. But the opportunities that come also from cities of connectivity, a place of potential creativity, efficiency, and cohesion. But the challenges are, how do you create a holistic model that combines socio-economic, spatial, and allow people to get involved in that co-production or place-people approaches? Again, that's a document that set out those. Hopefully, with our approach, you could actually come and develop that holistic approach. Tomorrow, there'll be a presentation, just as one attempt in Dublin, of trying to make that connectivity to start it, which is called Dublinked. You can Google it, but tomorrow morning there'll be a presentation where we can go through that. And I put this up at this meeting in Brussels in April, just to say, well, if we are talking about people, well, who are these people? They're not the ones at the very top, the 20-year-old, fit, almost Olympian sports people who normally design and make lots of decisions about what we do. They can be much more than that. And later on this morning, there'll be some presentations from people with different backgrounds. So you can see, well, what does this smart city or this people-friendly city look like from the eyes of an unemployed person or an older person? Okay? And just to finish off, I just want to say that when I talk about a design process, when I mention this to my colleagues, say, who are clinicians, medics, and I talk about design, they just think, my head's in the clouds. I'm being very fluffy and not really logical. So I normally use this approach where I'm saying, like, with the brief, there is a process that we can work through, and I can explain that in more detail as the cost action goes on, of an approach that we've been developing in the research group I work, where you have a brief, you look at the user's needs and the context, you look at exemplars, and you start to ideate. And then you test the ideation, and you make prototypes, and eventually you get things together. Now, that can seem very high level. I just wanted to show this, and this was a project I was involved with Oni from the Norwegian Design Council almost this time last year, where without thinking too much, I volunteered to get involved in a 24-hour design challenge, where you stayed awake from 12 o'clock one day to 12 o'clock the next day. And I worked with a design partner. This is my design partner. And my task was to find out, well, what was this person's needs in a context to come up with a new idea for a city with big data. And in this case, this person is suffering from Parkinson's disease, which means that it's difficult to read, write, or obviously be mobile because you are shaking, but phones and audio was his way of keeping in touch with the world. We made a real effort to find out what he needed over a 24-hour, very intense period. And at the end of it, all this brainstorming with Post-its, we came up with the concept of Konkili, which was this person's city of sounds. So for him, the smart, connected city and everything was one that allowed him to actually navigate just with sounds. So his digital data was not something on a screen. It wasn't numbers. It wasn't audio. It was actually sound, audio. And that came about by using a design process to really find out what that person wanted. So I'll run through these things quickly. We are thinking about rethinking cities. Yes, you have the smarter city, the one focused on technology and efficiency, but what about the livable city? The one focused more on what people want, aesthetics, livability, and design. How can we rethink cities? And if we rethink in cities from a people perspective, let's be aware the scale is really important. The scale of the person, the building, the space between buildings, the neighborhood that's made up of lots of buildings, and the city as a whole. Okay? So when we think of these work actions, working groups, whether it's the living lab, or it's the knowledge platform, or the research activities, or the city sounding board, the scale is really quite pivotal to that. And as I said, we have an embarrassing variety of skills in this cost action and in this room. I say embarrassing because it's a wealth of all these different skills and outlooks which we need to bring together. And I've just listed some of them there. In the arts and humanities, design, and science and technology. All of those skills are actually in this room at the moment, apart from the 30 other people who would like to be here but couldn't make it. The working groups that we've got, just to reiterate, we've got these 5 working groups: the City Sounding Board, the Knowledge Platform, the Living Laboratory, the Framework for Collaborative Urbanism, and the Research Roadmap. But you can really simplify those fancy words in just saying the City Sounding Board is what needs to work. The Knowledge Platform, what do we already know? The Living Lab, well, what are we actually doing? The Framework for Collaborative Urbanism, well, what is our model for this based on that information? And the Research Roadmap, well, what don't we know that we need to actually research? And I would encourage us to just keep those really simple questions in mind, because in a research network or a research program, it's amazing how we can all spin off in lots of different directions. Okay? Now, in the working groups, if you're not familiar, I think you probably are, but of them, a number of people stepped forward in April and said, do you know what, okay, I'll spend some time and I'll be a leader or a co-leader of a research group, of a working group rather. And those, I won't read them out, and the names of the people with a good gender balance and age who are prepared to lead this forward. Now, today, I'll be asking those people to lead the different groups with the different tables with numbers on, but you'll see this afternoon, the emphasis is more on the action as a whole, and tomorrow, it's important to think, well, okay, now we can concentrate more on the working groups, and what are we going to do with the working groups? So those are the people that have stepped forward to do that.